guys, welcome to Bookish Islander. My name is Juan. I hope you're all doing very well. I am really excited about today's video because I'm going to tell you about some of my favorite books and make the official announcement for my new YouTube channel. So today I have a few books that I love and I want to tell you why I love them. And as you will see, there is a connection between the books I'll talk about and my new channel. Now, one of my favorite books was written by the Colombian writer Gabriel García Márquez. I don't know if his books are considered fashionable anymore or not. I really don't care. It is hard to keep up with the zeitgeist. But what I know is that some of his books have meant a lot to me since I discovered his writing as a teenager and then read some of his novellas first before I graduated to his novels. Of course, I must talk about his masterpiece, 100 Years of Solitude. This is a remarkable book for many reasons. Whatever you think about this book, it is remarkable that a novel that was first published in 1967 continues to be read, and that even people who haven't read it have at least heard about it. I own two editions, this one in Spanish, which is an illustrated special edition. So some of the illustrations, all the illustrations are kind of spoilery because they illustrate episodes in the novel. It has a lot of illustrations, as you can see. So this is the edition that I own in Spanish, and then I own this one by Penguin in English, which is translated by Gregory Rabassa. 100 Years of Solitude is the only book by García Márquez that many people have read, and that's a double-edged sword. Why? Because readers make all kinds of assumptions on his writing, or even Latin American writer writing as a whole from reading this one novel. 100 Years of Solitude is also responsible for the popularization of the term magical realism. This term is used and misused so much, particularly in English. Okay, magical realism has a long history in Latin American writing. It's not a new thing, he didn't invent it. Many writers have used fantastical or magical elements in otherwise realistic settings as a way really to deepen our understanding of reality. I think it is safe to say that thanks to the translations of his work, García Márquez contributed to the spreading of magical realism outside Latin America. 100 Years of Solitude is a novel that tells the story of 7 generations of a Colombian family, the Buendías, over 100 years in the remote and fictional town of Macondo. Some readers struggle with the names of the different family members throughout the 7 generations. And the reason for this is that some of the names are repeated throughout the generations, but this is not something García Márquez invented. There is a tradition in Spanish-speaking countries to use our ancestors' names as a way to pay homage to them. For example, I am named after my maternal grandfather, and so is my brother, and so is one of my cousins. Of course, not everybody does it, and other naming traditions coexist with that one. But I have never found the issue of repeated names in 100 Years of Solitude confusing or strange. Having said that, most editions of this novel come with with a family tree. Here's mine. In 100 Years of Solitude, there is one character who outlives everybody else and lives the 100 years of the narration, Ursula Iguarán. She's the wife of and first cousin to José Arcadio Buendía, who's the founding patriarch of both the family, the Buendías, and the town of Macondo. To me, Ursula is the central character. There are a lot of characters in 100 Years of Solitude, but they are all linked to each other thanks to Ursula. One of the major themes of the novel is incest. When Ursula marries her cousin José Arcadio, she is afraid that their children will be born with a pig's tail. That's according to popular superstition. She is relieved when the 2nd generation of the family are born without tails. One night, José Arcadio dreams of a city made of mirrors called Macondo, and he decides to go find it. And that is the episode that kickstarts the whole novel. The newlyweds, José Arcadio and Ursula, together with a group of people, go on an expedition in search of that place, and they end up settling down in a remote site, which will, of course, become Macondo. The most important theme in 100 Years of Solitude is, of course, solitude. There is a central friendship in the narrative between José Arcadio and Melquiades. Melquiades is responsible for bringing inventions and novelties to Macondo every year. Things like ice or the radio. But because Macondo is so isolated, most of those things seem magical to the town's inhabitants. José Arcadio and Melquiades get so close that Melquiades is given a room of his own at the family home in Macondo. And Melquiades keeps inhabiting that room even after his death. And that's one of the magical elements of the novel. There is so much more I could say about 100 Years of Solitude, but I don't want to bore you. So let's move on to another book, which is Love in the Time of Cholera by García Márquez. Again, this book first came out in 1985, so almost 20 years after 100 Years of Solitude. And it is the other big novel by the Colombian writer. In fact, many people seem to prefer this book to his most famous one. Love in the Time of Cholera is about the love story between Florentino Ariza and Fermina Daza, which begins when they are both very young. The love story is not told straightforwardly at all, and I think that is the genius of this novel. The genius of this novel is not so much in the story itself, but in how it is told. So, if I sat here now and gave you a summary of the plot, which I won't do because I never do that in my videos, and then you started reading the novel, you might think I'd lie to you, because events are not told in a dull chronological order. But the way García Márquez chose to tell this story is so much more affecting and moving that if he had told you the story in chronological order. Everything happens in a thinly disguised Colombia between the late 19th century and the early 20th century. One of my favorite things about this novel, apart from the structure and the characters, is the humor. The central metaphor is love as a disease, not just as an emotional disease, but a physical one. And as we're seeing with pandemics and viruses that shall go unnamed on this video because YouTube doesn't, for some reason, like creators referring to it by name, this particular metaphor, love as sickness, is always relevant. And Love in the Times of Cholera could be rewritten and set in different periods of time, replacing cholera for whatever virus was going around, like HIV or the current scare that shall remain unnamed. Another theme in this novel is aging and death, which, if you think about it, also has a lot to do with what is going on right now. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you need to read this book. Now is the time. I cannot think of a better novel to read right now than Love in the Times of Cholera. Now, for my next book, I'd like to stay in Latin America, if I may, but I'm going to move north to Mexico and talk to you about Pedro Paramo, which is the best ghost story I have ever read. But let me put it down, take a pause before I go on. You may have noticed that all the books that I'm discussing in this video have one thing in common. Although they are all widely available in English translation, and indeed in many other languages, they were all published originally in Spanish. And that is where my new YouTube channel comes in. As you know, Spanish is my first language. But what you may not know is that I have experience teaching Spanish as a foreign language. And that is why I have created a new educational channel here on YouTube. The name of my new channel is Spanish with Juan. I launched it about a month ago without much fanfare. I put out new videos every Sunday in which I explain the grammar, give you learning tips, help viewers improve their pronunciation, and much more. All the videos on Spanish Talk with Juan are in Spanish, but I do try to speak at a slow rate, and also every video is subtitled, so viewers can look up any words they don't understand. If you already speak a little Spanish and would like to improve it, or if you know someone who does and are willing to show them my channel, you will find a link to Spanish Talk with Juan in the description box of this video. So if you're interested, please head over to Spanish Talk with Juan after you're done watching this video and subscribe. I would really appreciate it a lot. Okay, thank you. Now let's go back to Pedro Paramo. Okay, if you like ghost stories but have not read this Mexican novel, you are missing out. Pedro Paramo was written by Juan Rulfo and it was first published in 1955 in Mexico. I have this beautiful edition that I brought a few years ago, and it's one of the very few books that survived my move from the UK back to the Canary Islands. The plot of this novel is simple. After his mother's death, the main character, Juan Preciado, travels to his mother's hometown, Comala. There he'll find his dad, who is a ghost. In fact, Comala is a ghost town, a town inhabited by ghosts. What is so surprising about this book is that initially it sold poorly and it didn't get good reviews, but it has now become one of the most critically acclaimed books ever written in Spanish. In fact, the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges considered Pedro Paramo one of the best books ever written in any language. And talking about Borges, let's move on to my fourth and my fifth books. Jorge Francisco Isidoro Luis Borges Acevedo, better known as Jorge Luis Borges or just Borges, is, as you know, one of the most important writers of the 20th century. Although he wrote poetry, he's better known as a short story writer. Some of his best short stories are published in fictions, which I have here. I have the original Spanish in this gorgeous edition. Borges wrote all the stories in this volume in the 1940s and 1950s. But I believe they became available in English translation in the early 1960s. Now, although he wrote in Spanish, Borges was hugely influenced by English literature. So he's the perfect author for readers who are familiar with English literature and would like to venture out into Spanish literature. Among other things, because all his writing really works in English. In fact, when you read it in the original Spanish, it almost feels like you're reading something that has been translated from English. Okay, there are so many memorable stories in this collection. One of my favorites is Pierre Menard, author of the Quixote, which reads like a book review. Only that the book that is reviewed in a lot of detail does not exist. Another one is Library of Babel, in which he describes a universe that is entirely made up of a library. Okay, so I'm going to put this down. I have another book of short stories by Borges, which is the Aleph. Just in case you don't know, the Aleph is the first letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the letter showing here. In the edition I own. Most of the stories in the Aleph are fantasy, and they have titles like The Immortal, The Theologians, The House of Asterion, and the Aleph itself. If you're new to Borges, you might need to take your time with each of the stories. They're very philosophical. And he was erudite and spent his life reading and studying. So I think it is a privilege to have access to his writing. But they're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. So these are some of my favorite books. Some people have asked me to talk about my favorite writers or books here on my channel, and I have been reluctant to do so because I think it is reductive, and also because I have only read a tiny portion of all the books ever written, so I'm not an expert, and I am not sure my opinion is worth that much. But today I thought I would talk at least about some of my favorite books. I don't want to say goodbye before mentioning a novel that I have not read yet, so it cannot be one of my favorites, but I've been wanting to read it for many years, and I should get to it relatively soon, really. I am talking about Hopscotch by the also Argentinian writer Julio Cortázar. This is an experimental and slightly intimidating novel, first published in Spanish in 1963. Here's my Spanish copy, Rayuela. Julio Cortázar also wrote short stories, and I have read many of them, but I have never felt brave enough to tackle one of his novels, so wish me luck with this one. Now, if you have read Hopscotch or any of the other books I discussed in this video, let me know in the comment section down below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Remember that my bookish videos come out every Saturday, although sometimes there is extra content during the week. And if you are so inclined, please head over to my other channel, Spanish Talk with Juan Now. The link is in the description box. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you again very soon. Bye bye.